Welcome to One on One with Ayanthi Philip. Today we have Rukshan Jayawardene, an advocator for the protection of wildlife. Welcome, Rukshan.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
Okay, so Rukshan, you're the second generation pioneer for wildlife photography.
Yes.
And in your quest to take good photographs in wildlife, you ventured into studying about leopards and wildlife. Am I right?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, well, anyway, to be a good wildlife photographer, you need to know your subject. And if your subject is wildlife, it's not just one species, it's a diversity of animals. And also you need to know wilderness. And so pursuing wildlife photography seriously, I felt that much of what is the resource, the wilderness and wildlife, is under.
Fantastic. So you're a past president of the Wildlife and Nature Protection Society.
That's right.
And the Environmental Foundation Limited. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. So what are your thoughts on what's happening to wildlife today?
Well, wildlife is under threat everywhere simply because we are a fairly small country, although a large island, and we have protected lands, maybe 12% protected under the Wildlife Department and 7 or 8% protected under the Forest Department. And all these wilderness lands have wildlife,
Right.
but they are, regardless of their legally protected status or statutory protection, protection on the ground is very variable.
Yes.
And therefore, in certain forest lands, animals are very poorly protected, and there is a lot of outside or illegal incursions and poaching or the illegal killing of wildlife. But much more ominous than that is recent moves by the government to remove something called 5/2001. It's a circular that protects what are called other forest lands. These are lands that are allied to the forest departments and the wildlife department's currently protected lands that used to be under GAs, or they had kind of regional, the GAs, now the administrative secretaries, they control them. But in that scheme, these other forest lands, their protection was not very effective. So in 2001, they were all brought within one circular and given to the forest department's
Right.
custody to protect. Now they want to basically rescind or remove that circular and give it back to where these lands came from administratively, which would actually mean the loss of these forest lands eventually, steady loss, because then they can be released for development, agriculture, anything at all.
Sure.
And the control would go. And we were initially told that it's about 500,000 hectares, but I think the correct figure is more like 620,000 hectares of forest land of Sri Lanka would be basically subject to commercial exploitation, development, and basically go under the axe. So this is a terrible loss if that happens, because these forest lands are, many of them are linkage forests that link forest department's currently protected lands with the wildlife department lands, and some of them basically are the only forested lands in a otherwise developed or urbanized or rural agricultural landscape. So, and they're scattered throughout the country, and not just in the wet, dry zone, but in the intermediate zone as well as the wet zone. So,
So losing 620,000 hectares, what does that mean to the wild animals?
It means, well, for the wild animals in those forest lands, it's a loss of their homes, basically.
Exactly.
And the current protection that they have, which is, though sometimes inadequate, is still better than what protection they'll have once this goes back to the regional administrations and out of the forest department's custody. And most of those animals will perish, will be killed through whatever illegal activity, because this is basically a removal of a kind of ring of protection that they now have.
Who are the protectors and custodians of our wildlife in Sri Lanka?
Well, primary custodian is the Wildlife Conservation Department, Department of Wildlife Conservation in Sri Lanka, and their job is to be custodial and protect all the wildlife in the wilderness areas that are under their jurisdiction, as well as to enforce what's called the Fauna and Flora Protection Ordinance, which protects almost every animal species in Sri Lanka, except for a very short negative list, which is like 5 or 6 species, which have conditional protection.
So let's take a country like Singapore, for example, who are very protective of their forests.
Yeah.
What can we learn from them?
Well, for instance, what we can learn is if we have very little of something, then we might actually treasure it. And that's what happened to Singapore. Singapore is mostly an urbanized island, or now kind of group of islands. There are some other small islands. And Singapore protects the small percentage of forests it has very assiduously. And they have programs where school children are educated about the value of rainforest, because the natural vegetation of Singapore is rainforest. Before urbanization and before farmlands, it was lowland rainforest like our Singharaja. So they have 2 or 3 small patches of it, and if you look at the size of the island, that island is, we are about 220 or 30 times larger than Singapore. And within that small area, I mean, they are smaller than our western province, and in that small area, they still protect a bit of forest, and they will continue to protect that forest because they value it. And they have put flyovers and various ways where the wildlife that still lives in those forests can cross over the roads and walkways and not get entangled with the humans. And so the thing is, they're constantly looking to improve this nature experience, mainly because they almost lost it all. We have still so much, and we are willing to sacrifice it for all kinds of other baubles and pie-in-the-sky development schemes.
Sure.
What do you do with the forest? You cut it down. Can you just get some money and regrow a better forest, a better biodiversity in it, and in what time frame?
Sure.
Nobody even knows how to regrow these forests. Experimentally, we are growing one. WNTS is growing one on a hillside in.
You're all growing a forest.
Yeah, in the red zone.
Okay, so we have the custodians, then we have the general public, we have the people, and a lot of them love wildlife, they go on safaris. What can we do, the general public, what can we do?
Well, first, I think all Sri Lankans need to realize if they do care about wilderness, and they really should, because all life actually still flows from wilderness areas, whether it's the water we drink or it's the air we breathe. These fundamental basic life needs come from wilderness areas, and really the food we eat, because though we really shouldn't be eating wildlife, most domesticates animals, animal proteins, animals we eat were once wild animals. We have bred them, and we have basically bred certain characteristics, whether it's chicken that comes from Southeast Asian jungles, we still have jungle fowl here, or whether it's cattle, they were once wild. So if you just look at, if you leave the animal side, all crops are all domesticated, they're all wilderness species once, whether it was rice or wheat or corn, and we have domesticated them. So if for some reason something disastrous happens to our rice crop or our wheat crop, and we lose it all due to some disease or some other calamity or climate change or whatever, then our next food crop is also going to come from wilderness areas. If we have no wilderness areas left, what do we eat? We can't eat rocks. So that's how, you have to look at the fundamental building blocks of life on earth comes from the wilderness. So did we. We were once like chimps or other primates that live in the wilderness, we are part of the wilderness.
Sure.
One can have all kinds of religious sentiments and other arguments, but there is more and more evidence, and you can prove these things, that evolution did happen, and we did come out of forest lands into grasslands, and then into rural, agricultural, and then urban landscapes.
So one more question, the last one. Animal traps have come to light. I believe these have been there for a long time, but now it's on the news. What are your thoughts on it? What's the solution? How can we prevent this from happening?
Yeah, people will always want to kill wildlife. There are always people who break laws and do
Why is that? Why do people want to kill wildlife?
Because it's commercially viable.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people think that a lot of hunting, or what's called poaching, illegal hunting of wildlife in or outside protected areas, happens because people are desperate and they need food. But really, that is a tiny percentage of who kills wildlife. Mostly people are killing wildlife because there is a commercial market. There's a demand for it. There's a demand from rural places that serve food, from kades to little hotels to bigger hotels to very big establishments.
So you're saying that they would kill leopard and sell the meat?
No. That's that's a related thing. No, but the meat of animals like deer and sambar, and wild boar. So because there are people who are ready to pay money to buy that meat, to consume it, there are people ready to go out and put snares or trap guns and procure that meat.
Right. Okay?
Even though it's illegal, even though they run the risk of prosecution and falling foul of the police or the wildlife department, and they can be taken to courts and they can be charged. They think it's worth the risk.
Okay.
Partly because prosecutions are not it doesn't happen often enough, and the policing of these protected areas are not good enough. So there are always loopholes, always ways to get in and out with these things. But leopards are caught because these snares are set for other animals, and leopards, for a long time, leopards have been getting caught in snares being set for animals like pigs and maybe other animals that the snarer or the trapper hopes to kill.
Right.
But once a leopard is caught in a snare, then there is a commercial value that the snarer sees in this animal that is not his target species that has got caught, because there is a demand for the claws, the nails of leopards, still for the skin. If you know how to skin the animal well and kind of cure the skin in a sense, somebody will want to buy it. Or
in Sri Lanka?
Yeah, in Sri Lanka. Yeah, it does go into people's hands from the person who snared or killed the leopard. Many cases like that have been prosecuted. Many can't be pursued because of the type of individual who's been involved. Some well-connected politicians have been behind some of these things, the end buyer of leopard skins. So until a case like that is taken to its logical conclusion and the due process takes place, you can't stop kind of that segment from consuming something protected like the leopard. But saying that subsequently, in the last few years, people have been deliberately snaring leopards, partly because of its commercial value, and we don't know what other uses, because even the meat is processed. Now the case 2011 where a leopard was killed and its meat was packaged to be sold, and he had already sold some meat, so people are eating them. In the hills they do eat them. They eat just about any species you can think of in some of those areas. So the estates where these snarings happen have a huge responsibility as the managers and as the bosses of the people who are actually laying the snares. And the wildlife department needs to become more active and be more aware of what's happening, because if there are targeted poaching operations targeting the leopards in the hill country, then their populations are not going to last very long, because once people get to know where leopards live, when they are territorial, and they will always come along the same paths, and every 2-3 weeks a leopard will visit the same place in its territory.
Right.
And so it's predictable. So you can anticipate what the animal will do, and you can.
It's interesting that you say that leopards have commercial value.
Unfortunately,
Right.
including leopard bone in the Chinese medicine market, they are increasingly substituting leopard bones for tiger bones. Tiger bones have traditionally been used in Chinese medicine. In fact, there are tiger farms in China to supply mainly tiger bone for the Chinese medicine market or industry. And then secondarily, they process the skins and other things like nails and teeth, and every part of the animal is consumed by humans in one way or another. That's really unfortunate, because the living animal is our resource. From Sri Lankan standpoint,
Absolutely.
that is a wild animal that is native to Sri Lanka. And if you talk about ownership of who does this island really belong to, it really belongs to the elephants and the leopards and bears, because long before humans set foot here, whether we came here 100,000 years ago, perhaps 10 times as long, a million years ago, these animals were already here. They just walked across land bridges and colonized this, pristine island. And then we came along centuries or millennia later, and we've turned everything upside down.
Rukshan, what's a general message that you would like to convey to the public?
Yeah, what I would like to convey is that Sri Lanka's wilderness and wildlife is everybody's heritage, every Sri Lankan's birthright, even ones who are still to be born, unborn. So the wildlife department or any department, any government, any minister, they're just custodial over this. The ownership is yours. It's everybody, every man's, woman's and child's. So unless Sri Lankans realize that this is their heritage and they need to stand up and speak out about its destruction and its loss, others who have less interest and who really whose heritage it really isn't, but they are just doing a job or just passing through and trying to maximize their profit from something that is common resource, will exploit it, and these things will get pushed to extinction, and forests will disappear, and life on this island will be affected adversely.
Thank you so much, Rukshan. Thank you for coming today. It's wonderful that you are an advocate for wildlife and so passionate about this. We thank our venue partner, the Hilton Colombo. See you next time.